All right, let's jump into this. We're talking about the global market for diabetes devices, and one number really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah, there are a lot of big numbers in this report. I'm curious, which one are you thinking of?
Well, get this. By 2025, this whole market is projected to hit, wait for it, 36.28 billion US dollars. That's billion with a B.
Wow, that's a pretty staggering figure, isn't it?
It is, and it really gets you thinking. That's a massive amount of money, resources, research, all going into diabetes care.
It speaks volumes about, well, first of all, the sheer scale of diabetes globally, how many people are living with it, and of course, how much investment is pouring into better management and treatment options.
Exactly. And that's what we are diving into today, right? This whole report, analyzing the global diabetes devices market. We're going to look at where it stands now, where it's headed, what's driving it.
Yeah, and I think what we are trying to do in this deep dive is pull out the most significant insights, the stuff that's going to have the biggest impact, not just the numbers themselves.
Right, because it's easy to get lost in the billions and percentages and all that. But we want to understand what it all means for, innovation, access to care, those real-world implications.
Exactly. And I think we have some really interesting things to unpack here.
Totally agree. So where do we even begin with something this massive?
Well, I think the natural starting point is, to look at that overall market size and see how quickly it's actually expanding. Then we can break it down by regions, by types of devices. It gets fascinating.
Okay, so painting the big picture first. We already threw out that $36.28 billion figure for 2025, right? But what about further out?
Yeah, so by 2033, just 8 years later, the projection is for this market to reach $68.15 billion.
Hold on, it's basically going to double.
Almost. That's a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of 8.20% over that period. That kind of growth is hard to ignore, right?
It's huge. It's not just like a steady little climb. It's like this whole thing is on a rocket ship or something.
Well, that's a pretty good analogy, actually, because the fuel for this rocket ship, if you will, is the rising prevalence of diabetes. I mean, more people needing these management tools equals a bigger, faster growing market.
Okay, that makes sense. So big market, a ton of momentum, but it can't be booming equally everywhere, right? So geographically, where's all the action happening?
Right now, North America is definitely the king of the hill. It's got the biggest slice of the pie, over 40% of the global market as of 2025. That's a total value of $13.42 billion.
Okay, yeah, that's a big chunk of the action.
And the projection is for that to keep growing at a pretty healthy rate, about 6.7% per year through 2033.
So still a solid growth trajectory, but not quite as explosive as the global average, right?
Right. I think the key takeaway here is that North America has a really mature healthcare infrastructure and a high rate of tech adoption.
Okay, and that makes sense. The U.S. in particular, the powerhouse for, medical innovation, new technology, all of that. I think I remember the report breaking down North America even further, though,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it does. The U.S., as you might expect, is the big dog. Their market size in 2025 was $10.59 billion, and that's projected to grow at about 6.5% annually.
So still solid, but what's driving that growth specifically in the U.S.?
I think a lot of it comes down to their established hospital pharmacy sector.
Okay, so that's playing a big role in getting these advanced devices into the hands of patients, right?
Exactly. Plus, a lot of the technological breakthroughs are coming out of the U.S., so they're kind of at the forefront of that innovation.
Makes sense. What about our neighbors up north, Canada?
Canada has a market size of 1.61 billion, but what's interesting is that they're actually projected to grow a bit faster at a CAGR of 7.5%. Part of that might be because of their increasing older population, which, tends to mean a higher risk of type 2 diabetes.
Oh, interesting how those demographic factors can influence these things. And then Mexico.
Yeah, Mexico's a significant player too. Market size is 1.22 billion, and they're projected to grow at about 7.2%. So all three countries are contributing, but the U.S. is definitely the heavy hitter in North America.
Okay, got it. So North America, kind of the established leader, right?
Mhm.
What about Europe? Where do they fit into all this?
Europe is number two globally. Their market share in 2025 was over 30%, so definitely a major player. Total market size is 10.52 billion.
Okay, that's comparable to North America, but the growth rate.
Growth rate is a bit higher, actually, projected to be around 7.2%. So steady growth there, but yeah, not quite as explosive as some other regions.
Interesting. And I'm guessing, just like with North America, the report dives into individual countries in Europe, right? What are some of the key players there?
Yeah, absolutely. The UK is one to watch. They're at 1.77 billion in market size with the CAGR of 8%, so they're moving pretty quickly.
And what's driving that growth in the UK?
I think a lot of it has to do with their healthcare infrastructure. It's really
Yeah.
advanced, and access to new technologies is pretty good.
Okay, makes sense. Who else are we seeing in Europe?
Germany is another big one at 2.08 billion in market size, and their growth rate is about 7.4%, probably influenced by their aging population like we talked about with Canada.
Interesting how that's a recurring theme. And what about France?
France is at 0.97 billion with a 6.4% growth rate. Italy is 0.90 billion, growing at 6.6%. Russia is interesting, 1.63 billion market size, and their growth is about 6.2%.
So a good mix of big and small players all contributing to that overall European market. But I'm noticing even those smaller markets are still growing.
Yeah. It shows how widespread the need is for diabetes management. I mean, even in countries that aren't the biggest economies, like Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, even Luxembourg, they're all seeing pretty healthy growth rates.
Interesting. So while those big markets are important, there's also a lot of activity happening in those smaller European nations.
Okay, now I am really curious about Asia Pacific. I feel like that's where we might see some of the biggest changes happening, right?
You are absolutely on the money. The ATAC region, that's where the real action is. They currently hold about 23% of the global market. That's 8.71 billion in 2025. But here's the kicker, their projected CAGR, it's a whopping 11%.
Wow, 11%. That's more than just steady growth. That's like a full-on surge, isn't it? It's definitely a market that's taking off. There's a huge amount of potential there.
So who are the key players driving this boom in Asia Pacific? Which countries are we talking about?
China is a major force here. They've got a market size of 3.66 billion, growing at 10.5% annually.
And what's fueling that growth in China specifically?
They have some major domestic players in the diabetes device market, and also access to healthcare is improving there, so more people are able to get the devices they need.
Okay, that makes sense. Who else are we watching in Asia Pacific?
India is another one to watch. They're starting from a smaller base. Their market size is 0.87 billion, but their growth rate is phenomenal, 12.9%. They're benefiting from a huge expansion of healthcare facilities and a growing awareness of diabetes management.
Wow, so they're really catching up fast, even from a smaller starting point. And who else are we looking at in Asia Pacific?
Well, Japan is also substantial, 1.20 billion in market size, growing at 9.5%. And South Korea, they're at 1.04 billion with a 10.1% growth rate. But really, it's not just about those big economies. Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, all of Southeast Asia, even the smaller markets, they're all showing really impressive growth rates.
And is that growth primarily driven by the same factors we've been discussing, like an aging population and increasing diabetes prevalence?
Those are definitely factors, but I think there's something else going on in APAC that's really interesting. We are seeing a huge shift towards mobile health technologies there.
So they're really embracing those new connected devices and apps and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And governments in some countries like China and India are really pushing for wider adoption of things like continuous glucose monitoring. It's actually outpacing trends in some of the more established markets. So that's something to keep an eye on.
It sounds like Asia Pacific is the region to watch in the coming years. Okay, so we've covered North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. What about the rest of the world? South America, the Middle East, Africa?
So South America represents about 5% of the global market. They're at 1.38 billion in 2025, and their projected CAGR is 8.9%, so solid growth there. Brazil and Argentina are the big players in that region. Brazil's growth is linked to their expanding hospital pharmacies, and Argentina is driven by the increasing need for patient monitoring solutions.
Okay, makes sense. And what about the Middle East?
Middle East has about a 2% market share. That translates to 1.45 billion in 2025, and their growth rate is pretty strong, 9.5%.
So a smaller market, but still growing quickly. Which countries are we talking about there?
Saudi Arabia and the UAE are the major ones. They're benefiting from a lot of investment in healthcare technology. Turkey's another one to watch. They have a growing burden of chronic diseases, including diabetes, so that's driving their market growth.
Okay, that makes sense. And then finally, Africa.
Africa is currently the smallest market, about 1% globally. That's about 0.88 billion in 2025.
So a small base, but what about the growth potential?
Their projected CGR is 8.5%, so definitely promising. South Africa is the largest market there, but Nigeria is also seeing growth, probably due to increasing urbanization and those kinds of lifestyle changes that often come with that.
Right, so we're seeing this trend of rising demand for diabetes devices pretty much across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. It really reflects just how widespread diabetes is becoming. It's a global health challenge for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the overall market size and growth, and we've broken it down geographically. But now I want to talk about the devices themselves, the actual tools that people are using.
Yeah, let's dive into that. The report segments the market by product type, and there's some key categories we need to talk about. First, you have the glucose monitoring devices. That includes your basic blood glucose meters, the test strips, lancets, all of that. But it also includes the continuous glucose monitors, those CGMs that are becoming so popular.
Right, so a whole range of monitoring options there, from the very basic to the more advanced. What's the next category?
Then you have insulin delivery devices. That's your syringes, your insulin pens, and your insulin pumps.
Okay, so the tools for actually delivering insulin. And what else?
We also have diabetes management software. Those are the apps and programs that help people track their data, analyze trends, and make decisions about their care.
Right, so it's not just about the physical devices, it's also about the digital tools that help people manage their diabetes. And then finally, there's one more category, right?
Yeah, the artificial pancreas systems. This is where it gets really interesting. These systems are designed to automate insulin delivery, kind of like a closed loop system. It's still early days for this technology, but it's definitely the future of diabetes management.
Yeah, that sounds like a game changer for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Okay, so those are the main product categories. But within those categories, which ones are really dominating the market right now?
In terms of revenue, insulin pumps are expected to hold on to their top spot.
And why is that? What makes them so dominant?
They offer a lot of benefits, better blood sugar control, fewer injections. They can deliver insulin very precisely, and they're programmable. Plus, they're getting easier to use, and a lot of them can integrate with those CGMs now.
Right, so they're kind of becoming more all-in-one systems, aren't they?
Yeah.
That makes sense why they're so popular. But are they also the fastest growing segment?
Actually, that's
Yeah.
where it gets interesting. While insulin pumps are on top now, the continuous glucose monitors, the CGMs, are the ones growing like crazy.
Really? So they're the ones to watch for the future.
Definitely. They offer a lot of advantages. I mean, they eliminate the need for constant finger pricking. They give you real-time data on your glucose levels. And the technology is getting better all the time. We're seeing more integration with apps. And there's a lot of work happening with AI, like using algorithms to predict glucose fluctuations. So it's all about getting more proactive and preventative with diabetes management. And people are really embracing that.
Yeah, I can see why. Okay, so we've got the devices themselves. Now, how are people actually getting these devices? Where are they buying them?
The report looks at distribution channels, and there are a few main ones. You have hospital pharmacies, that's a big one. Then you have retail pharmacies, those are your CVS, Walgreens, those kinds of places. And of course, we have online pharmacies now, which are becoming increasingly popular. And then finally, you have your diabetes clinic centers, which are more specialized.
Okay, so a pretty diverse range of options there. But which one is the most popular?
Right now, the biggest share of the market is held by hospital pharmacies. It's kind of the traditional way of doing things. You go to the hospital, you see a doctor, you get a prescription, and you fill it at the hospital pharmacy. They tend to have a wider selection of devices, especially those more advanced ones like insulin pumps, and they can provide a lot of guidance and support to patients.
Okay, that makes sense. But is that changing? Is there a different channel that's becoming more popular?
Yes, definitely. The fastest growing channel is actually retail pharmacies.
Really? Why is that?
Well, I think it comes down to convenience. Retail pharmacies are everywhere, they're easy to get to, and they're open longer hours. Plus, a lot of them now offer things like home delivery, so you don't even have to leave your house to get your supplies.
Right, so it's all about making things easier for the patient, taking down those barriers, and also with those more basic devices like the meters and test strips, a lot of them are over the counter now.
Exactly. So you don't even need a prescription, which is great for people who are just managing their diabetes on their own. And even for those who do need a prescription, a lot of retail pharmacies have pharmacists who are trained to provide diabetes care. So you can get your advice and support right there.
Okay, so we're seeing this shift towards more accessibility and convenience in how people manage their diabetes. I like that. All right, so we've talked about all the different players, the devices, the distribution, but I want to zoom out again and talk about the bigger forces at play here. What are the main factors driving this whole industry forward?
Well, first and foremost, it's the rising prevalence of diabetes globally. I mean, more people are getting diagnosed with the condition, and that's driving demand for effective management tools.
Right, that makes sense. What else is playing a role?
We're also seeing a lot of expansion in healthcare infrastructure in many parts of the world, especially in developing countries. This is improving access to healthcare, which means more people are able to get diagnosed and get the devices they need. And then, of course, there's technology. I mean, the advancements in diabetes devices are happening at an incredible pace.
Yeah, I'm curious, what are some of the most exciting advancements that you're seeing? I mean, we've talked about those CGMs and those automated insulin pumps, but is there anything else on the horizon?
Well, miniaturization is a big one. Devices are getting smaller and more discreet, which makes them easier to wear and less intrusive. Connectivity is another big trend, with devices being able to communicate with smartphones and other devices so people can track their data more easily. And then there's data analytics. We're starting to see devices that can use artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyze data and provide personalized insights to patients. So it's all about empowering people to take control of their diabetes and manage it more effectively.
That's really exciting. So there's a lot of momentum on that front. But are there any factors that are holding the market back? Any challenges that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, there are definitely some challenges. One of the biggest ones is the cost of these devices. Some of those advanced devices, like the CGMs and insulin pumps, can be really expensive, which can make them inaccessible for a lot of people, especially in countries without universal healthcare.
Right, that makes sense. What about data privacy? I mean, we're talking about devices that are collecting a lot of personal health data.
Yeah, data privacy is a huge concern. As these devices become more connected and data is being shared across multiple platforms, it's really important to make sure that patient data is being protected.
Absolutely. And what about the regulatory environment? Is that playing a role?
Yeah, definitely. In some countries, the regulatory pathways for these devices can be really complex and time-consuming, which can slow down innovation and make it harder for new devices to reach the market.
Okay, so some significant challenges there, but hopefully those will be addressed as the market continues to evolve.
Yeah.
What about emerging trends? What are some of the things that are shaping the future of this market?
One big trend is the increasing investment in research and development. Companies are pouring money into developing new and better devices, and that's really driving innovation. We're also seeing a growing awareness of diabetes among the general population.
Right, so people are becoming more proactive about their health, which is great.
Exactly. And that's leading to a greater demand for self-management tools, tools that empower people to take control of their diabetes.
Okay, so we're seeing a lot of positive trends there. Now, this is obviously a very competitive market. Who are some of the big players, the companies that are really leading the way?
Yeah, there are a lot of big names in this market. Some of the key players are Medtronic, Abbott Laboratories, Roche, Bayer, LifeScan, B. Braun, Dexcom, Insulet, Ipsum, Companion Medical, Sanofi, Valeritas, Novo Nordisk, Arcray, and that's just to name a few.
Wow, that's a lot of companies. And are they all kind of focusing on the same things, or are they specializing in different areas?
It's a mix. Some companies are more focused on developing those core devices like the meters and pumps, while others are really pushing the boundaries with those new technologies like the artificial pancreas systems and the data analytics platforms. And then you have companies like the big pharmaceutical companies. They're more focused on developing new drugs and therapies for diabetes.
Right, so it's a really diverse ecosystem with companies coming at it from all different angles. Now, I'm curious, has the report mentioned any specific activities or developments from any of these companies that you found particularly interesting?
Yeah, there have been a few things recently. In January 2025, Bayer announced new data showing that their drug, finer known, can actually reduce the risk of developing diabetes in people with heart failure.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So it's not just about managing existing diabetes, it's also about preventing it in the first place.
Exactly. And then in December 2024, Roche made a big move. They acquired Carmot Therapeutics, which is a company that's been developing new treatments for obesity and diabetes. So clearly they're looking to expand their presence in this market.
Okay, so they're making strategic moves to get ahead. Anyone else doing anything interesting?
Yeah, in January 2025, Insulet Corporation, they're the company behind the Omnipod, which is that tubeless insulin pump. They announced that they're launching their new Omnipod 5 system in several new European countries. So they're really expanding the global reach of their technology.
Okay, so a lot of activity on the global stage. And it sounds like these companies are really focusing on a few key things: continuous innovation, strategic partnerships, and really harnessing those new technologies.
Exactly. It's a really dynamic market, and these companies are constantly looking for ways to stay ahead of the curve and meet the evolving needs of people with diabetes.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. For our listener who's trying to take all this in, what are the key takeaways? What are the most important things to remember about this market?
I think the biggest thing is just the sheer size and growth of this market. It's already huge, and it's only going to get bigger in the coming years. And that speaks to the growing global need for diabetes management solutions. Also, it's important to remember that while North America is currently the dominant market, the Asia Pacific region is growing the fastest. And that could have a big impact on the market in the years to come.
Right, so there's a shift happening on the global stage. And what about the devices themselves? What's important to know about them?
I think the continuous glucose monitors and those automated insulin delivery systems, those are really the game changers. They're transforming how people manage their diabetes, making it easier and more effective.
Right, so those are definitely technologies to watch. Okay, so a lot of information here, but I want to bring it back to the listener. For you, the person listening to this, why does all this matter? Why should you care about the global market for diabetes devices?
Because this market directly impacts the tools that are available to you, the person managing your diabetes, or maybe helping a loved one manage theirs. These trends we discuss, they're going to shape what those devices look like, what they can do, how much they cost, how easy they are to get. So understanding this market, it gives you context, it helps you navigate your own diabetes journey, and it maybe even gives you a glimpse into what the future of diabetes care might hold.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the individual, it's about everyone, right?
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about a global health challenge here. And the more we understand this market, the better equipped we'll be to advocate for the things that matter, like access to affordable and effective diabetes care for everyone, no matter where they live.
Okay, I like that. So a call to action there for all of us. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm going to leave our listener with a question, something to think about.
I like that. What's the question?
Well, we've talked about all this incredible innovation, these amazing technological advancements, but the reality is that a lot of people around the world still don't have access to basic diabetes care, let alone these cutting-edge devices.
Right. That's the big challenge, isn't it? The gap between the haves and have-nots.
Exactly. So here's the question. As this market grows, as innovation continues to accelerate, how do we ensure that these life-changing devices become more affordable and more accessible to everyone who needs them, regardless of their location or their economic situation? It's a big question, and there's no easy answer, but I think it's something we all need to be thinking about.
I agree, that's a crucial question, and I don't think it's one with a simple answer. It's going to require collaboration, innovation, and maybe even a little bit of a paradigm shift in how we think about healthcare.
Well said.
Hmm.
It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, right?
Absolutely. It's an opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of millions of people around the world.
I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you for joining us today on the Deep Dive for this fascinating exploration of the global diabetes devices market. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. We'll see you next time for another Deep Dive.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.